Hello everyone, this is Justin Smythe from nextbigtrade.com. This is stage 2 breakout pullbacks for September 5th, 2025. Starting off with some artificial intelligence stocks, TEM continues to look great here, coming out of this massive basing pattern, IPO base. You've got, big volume on the right hand side of the base, minimal overhead resistance, and then you've got the biotech sector, which is starting to act well on top of a hot artificial intelligence sector. So really, if you look at the factors and stage analysis that contribute to a potential big winning stock, TEM really has everything, and we're just kind of waiting on follow through of the breakout out of this base, but looking really, really solid here. Daily chart, you can really trade this against the 20-day moving average, where there's also some support here as well. Stocks should really continue to hold that if it's in a bullish configuration here, and then just looking for this to continue higher and finally break out of this base. WLF, a recent one that just exploded on huge volume, and then it's just had this nice pullback on lighter volume, right where it should pull back, right above this former resistance level. And we're just looking for this to follow through higher again. This stock is also heavily shorted, so that's another bonus. But again, you can trade this pretty much right where it is with a tight stop. You've got that shelf of support underneath it. You've got the 20-day moving average to trade against, and the stock so far is respecting that key level. So really great looking setup here. Nice decline in volume, and we're just looking for this to follow through higher out of this flag pattern. A-Lab, another one, explosive move higher. This one had a big move in 2024, gave back all the gains. Semiconductors had a tough time back here, and then the stock based nicely in July. One of the few stocks to really break out in July, and then it's consolidated during the choppy August period for tech, but acted very well. Now has no overhead resistance. A little bit extended still after a big rally. That's probably the one downside here. But overall, pretty good looking pattern coming out of this big IPO base. And again, looking for a continuation higher here. You've got some nice volume coming in here the last couple days. And so this one could be ready to follow through here. And you can play this against these short-term moving averages with tight risk management. So really pretty good setup here. Might need a little bit more time, but other than that, a good area to kind of trade against and see what happens. Moving over to the cannabis stocks, having their first pullback after a big high volume breakout. TLRY pulling back on a nice decrease in volume here. Daily chart can pretty much trade this right against the 20-day moving average, or maybe a little bit below with this little support level. Looking for some follow through. Again, notice how the volume tapered off nicely this past week, even with the stock pulling back. CURLF, another one, nice, again, just great decrease in volume here on the pullback after a monster high volume breakout. Daily chart, again, kind of the same setup as TLRY, just looking at these support levels of these short-term moving averages to trade against, and looking for this to resume higher. It might need a little bit more time. Cannabis might need another week or two, but it's much better entry now. You're getting in after a pullback than chasing, the first part of this rally. So better setup here for the cannabis stocks. SNDL, the last one, this one, the good thing about this one is it cleared out all of its overhead resistance really already. So if this one corrects just a little bit more, you've got a nice place to trade against, looking for follow through higher. Again, with no overhead resistance. So daily chart, if you get a little bit more of a pullback down to that 20-day moving average, that's a great spot to look for an entry, and then looking for follow through higher. Moving on to some more strong stocks that are at better pullback levels now. MP, multi-week pullback to the 10-week moving average, still above a lot of important levels. Um, much less extended now. People chasing it over 100% above the 30-week. Obviously, that didn't work out very well, but now you're getting to a much better level to buy a position at. So that's where patience comes in, and you can look for a better entry, after a pullback. On the daily here, you can see how it's kind of like had this multi-day decline now. You've got the 50-day right there. You've got this gap support. So you're starting to get some like stronger long-term levels to kind of trade against here and see if you can get an entry here, and get some follow through. But I think you got these breakaway gaps right below price now, so you're really getting into a more attractive entry, and you've kind of shaken out a lot of the late chasers, and they've really, they haven't sold this stock off on heavy volume yet either. So I think this is looking like a pretty good level to get into the stock now. SYM robotics stock, another multi-week pullback, volume tapering off nicely, nice level to trade against. Daily, right at that 50-day moving average, kind of starting to find support here. Got a little bit of volume on Friday. So again, like nice level to kind of look for an entry against. Looking for this to kind of follow through higher now after a big pullback. A couple more stocks. Space stock, RKLB, just honestly, like, you can't really find a much better stock in the stock market than this stock. I mean, look at how well, this one did really well when space took off in 2024. Consolidated those gains nicely, pulled back during the bear market, but didn't really have any, a little bit of selling here, but held up extremely well during the panic, barely moving lower. Then was above the 30-week right after the panic, started breaking out again, no overhead resistance, holding up extremely well again on this pullback. Just looks fantastic, really, and it looks like a major leader in the space sector, which is why we have this on as a long-term trade as well. So great level to trade Rocket Lab, either for a position trade or a long-term trade at this point. And the daily chart, you see you've got this nice entry right around the 50-day moving average here to trade against. So really can be bought like anywhere around it where it is right now with a tight risk and looking for follow through higher. CRISPR and their artificial intelligence plus biotech stock, big pullback, nice long-term level to trade against. Looking for follow through, like biotech starting to act well again, and you've got artificial intelligence obviously leading the market. So again, you've got a big pullback in this stock, but the right sectors are starting to act well for this stock to really turn around. And you've got this important level to trade against. It shouldn't be below this level, really. So you've got a good low risk entry here where the stock could easily start to follow through higher. Finally, WBTN, another recent high volume breakout. Nice dry up in volume on the pullback. Is still above all of the resistance, really, that's kind of important, and that's acting as support. So great level to trade this stock against right now, and it barely has any IPO resistance left. On the daily, you can see this one's consolidated nicely against this former resistance level, and the 20-day volume has declined, so we're just looking for kind of a follow through move here This one's thinly traded, but again, it's got a nice IPO base and minimal overhead resistance. So bottom line, lots of good stocks, lots of good levels to trade against. I mean, really, these are great setups. So we'll see if the market can kind of uh, be a win behind these stocks. If the S&P 500 starts moving higher again, I think some of these stocks really could start to get going here.